Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. Today we are thrilled, and I didn't even introduce us. I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. but today we are thrilled to welcome an award-winning journalist, acclaimed filmmaker, magazine editor-in-chief, and writer and director of the upcoming 80s SciFi documentary, In Search of Tomorrow. Please welcome David Weiner. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. You know, hopefully your audience knows who you are, so you need
just in case it's a newcomer, a new straggler coming on in. So, to start with, we were fortunate enough to have seen the advanced copy of this, and it was incredible. I mean, so well done. It's my era, so I loved it. All my teen years were in the 80s, so it brought back so many great memories. The whole documentary is close to 5 hours. It doesn't feel it. If anything, I wanted more. I watched it twice, so it was so much fun. You have all these people associated with sci-fi in some capacity, contributing commentary, including Ike. So first question is, because there are so many great science fiction movies through the years, what was it about 80s sci-fi that made you decide to focus on that decade?
Well, for those who might not know about the previous documentaries I've done, I work with a company, Creator VC, that's headed by Robin Block, and he's in the UK, and he wanted to make a bunch of genre documentaries that focused entirely on a decade. So he started with In Search of the Last Action Heroes. And then he said, you know, well, we've done action. I think horror, 80s horror is a great thing that we could sort of investigate and journey through. And so we did In Search of Darkness. And as we were creating and producing In Search of Darkness, and it hadn't even been finished, he's like, sci-fi, that's the next logical step. And we would have our Zoom meetings. You know, he was in London, and here I am in Los Angeles. And I think he would look over my shoulder and he'd see my Enterprise sitting right there. and you know, this poster from Star Trek, the motion picture. And, you know, he's just like, I think David might kind of be into that too. And prior to this, doing all this stuff, I was the editor, as you mentioned, editor-in-chief of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. Which was a favorite magazine of mine as a kid. And what I loved about when I got a chance to make this magazine, it's more than just monsters. It's sci-fi, it's fantasy, it's horror, it's just pop culture, it's all the genre stuff that us geeks love. And so I loved the elbow room and the flexibility to be able to just explore any genre I really wanted, that as long as there was sort of that theme there, I could tackle it. So very long answer, long or medium short. Sci-fi is just, I'm just a huge fan. I've always been a fan. I've been a Trekkie since I Planet of the Apes, all that stuff growing up in the 70s. You know, I was born in '68, so I was a 70s kid and an 80s teen. And so
oh wow, yeah, that's
all this stuff that came in and came my way, I was just like, I lapped it up, you know, and I was a huge monster kid too, you know, so all the movies that I missed, you know, from the Universal monsters in the 30s all through the 50s, and then Hammer horror, I just lapped all this stuff up, and I just have a great appreciation for movies of the imagination.
Well, I'm certainly grateful that you did an 80s sci-fi doc, and I got to talk a little bit about Star Trek too. So it was a blast, and thank you so much. I was so honored to have been a part of it. It really was a lot of fun, and I love the documentary as well. I mean, I have seen In Search of Darkness. Horror is not my thing. Sci-fi I absolutely love. So yeah, and I felt like this documentary just flew by. It was like I looked at my time, you know, clock and thinking, oh gosh, I'm getting close to the end. This is a bummer. I mean, I can't stand it. But just from your perspective, what do you think is the big main difference between 80s sci-fi and previous previous decades of science fiction.
Yeah, it sort of has this evolution of, sci-fi movies go all the way back to the earliest days of film. You know, George Play and A Trip to the Moon, 1902. You know, everyone knows that iconic, the moon, you know, face gets the capsule in the eye. You know,
right?
It's iconic. In fact, I have a bottle of wine that has that on the label, which is kind
of. Oh my God. That's outstanding.
But, you know, from the Flash Gordon serials, you know, I don't think it's spoiling too much to say that in the opening credits of In Search of Tomorrow, I wanted to pay homage to the sci-fi of the past leading up to the 80s in terms of just giving you a flavor of how long it's been around and the type of evolution it's gone through. So, you know, you've got, you know, A Trip to the Moon, you have, H.G. Wells' Things to Come, you know, you have Forbidden Planet, and you've got, you know, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And it just keeps on evolving. 2001, which I know is your favorite movie ever, Ike.
Yes.
You know, and then this little movie called Star Wars. And then you're still not in the 80s yet, but Star Wars and everything leading up to it, especially in the 70s, Star Wars was this pivotal moment in sci-fi where everything was really kind of dark and dystopian coming out of Vietnam and Watergate era. You know, everything was sort of conspiracy driven or starting to become environmentally conscious, like Silent Running, you know, Douglas Trumbull's Silent Running, which was 72, I think, 71 or 72. And so it was a little dark though. Damnation Alley, which came out the same year as Star Wars, but Soylent Green, Planet of the Apes, everything was about death and doom and gloom and destruction. And then I think Spielberg and Lucas, they were just like, we want to find the happiness of our youth from these Flash Gordon serials and just the more wholesome, positive look at the future and the present and aliens coming in who are friendly and not wanting to kill us. Yeah. And ultimately, you know, there was a seismic shift when, you know, Star Wars comes along. Because I know I'm doing a lot of talking, I'll shut up in a minute. But there's also, you know, THX 1138 as well, which is George Lucas. And I think a lot of people, they know that he did that, but they kind of forget. He was following a path just like everyone else was in the 70s, where they're thinking about 1984 and dystopian and authoritarian regimes and, you know, the common man and how they endure and try and evade or escape from that kind of stuff. Logan's Run, it's all about escaping, not destroying the big, you know, entity and being victorious. It's more about discovery that what you thought was your world is not, and it's something else. That was really a key theme going on. I think the things evolved, and I think everyone was tired of all this and wanted a little happier element of movie-going escape, even though not everything was perfect in the 80s.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that was totally it. I think it was like a fun type of sci-fi in the 80s. You know, other than Aliens, I mean, you know. But,
Aliens is fun too, though.
Yes.
Aliens is a roller coaster ride. Yes. I mean, yeah, it's scary and horrifying in a variety of different ways, and it tackles a lot of the wonderful themes that sci-fi can, which is a reflection of, you know, present day in a different environment. But you know, Aliens to me is just like the e-ticket movie of the 80s.
Yes.
Know?
Oh gosh, for sure.
Well,
I also want to add real quick before you ask sort of the next question that the way I got Ike involved in the movie, other than him saying, yes, I'd love to do it, which made me very happy, was a friend of yours, Ike, saw that we were initially doing In Search of Tomorrow and we were talking about it. And she said, oh, you should get Ike in this movie, you know, Ike Eisenmann. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that's right. You know, the guy from Escape, Duffy Moon, and the guy from Escape, a fantastic, you know, journey and all that kind of stuff like that. It clicked with me because this to me is as much about nostalgia as anything else. And when I made that connection, like, of course he's in Star Trek II as well. This is like, you're like the perfect person to help this journey for a certain generation to just, you know, relate what you loved, but also the fact that you were part of it as well, I thought was super cool. And so I thank your friend for connecting us.
Well, it's a mutual friend because she's also the same person who connected me with Jonathan. So
Ah,
we're gonna use it's Jan Eldridge, right? That's who.
yeah. Jan
That's who.
Eldridge.
Yeah. So we're giving her a shout out now.
Exactly. I wasn't sure if I should say her name or not.
I don't mind whatsoever. She's a
I
fantastic
hope she's getting
author.
a percentage. That's all I could say. You know?
Yeah. No, she's a fantastic author, and she connected me with Jonathan for another interview, and then Jonathan and I decided to start doing all this crazy stuff together. So Jan's been responsible for some major networking here. So yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
Jan will get a cut later.
Yeah.
We'll come back to the documentary in a minute. I just had some other questions because going through your bio was just incredible facts about you. First, you got your start in Entertainment Tonight. How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I got my journalism. Well, you know, I worked at Entertainment Tonight for 13 years, but when I went to film school in Ithaca in upstate New York, and I've been very lucky in that I always knew, probably since Star Wars, I walked into that theater and I walked out a changed person, because I transformed from just an audience member to one who wanted to make movies and entertain people and share more about entertainment and find out more about entertainment, and that really shaped just my mindset. And I graduated film school and I just headed west and went straight to, you know, I grew up in New York and Chicago, went straight to California, and I was in movies for 4 years, on music videos and commercials and features and television, running around with a headset as an AD or a PA or whatever job I could get. And that was a dream of mine, to just be someone important on a movie set. You know, yelling, rolling, and cut was important to me, you know. But once I achieved that dream, I realized I'm not sure if I want to be standing on sets for the rest of my life for 12, 15, 20 hours a day. It's quite a grind, as you know, Ike, right? So, and so because of that, I really wanted to diversify. Well, no one's going to hand me a job to direct movies or to write movies. I got to start doing this myself. So I started writing and screenwriting, and I followed a whole different path into development. But what ultimately happened was the .com boom kind of happened in the 90s, and all of a sudden online journalism was a thing that wasn't around before. And I have all these pop culture factoids swimming around in my brain. And I always thought to myself, I know too much about nothing important, and I need to get one day ideally paid, you know, in some way, shape, or form, to be able to impart this useless knowledge with people who appreciate it, you know, because, you know, Lord knows my family didn't care about that stuff.
I know that feeling well.
You know, so I had a couple jobs like that, and then Entertainment Tonight came along after I was .com poster boy of, you know, startups and layoffs and startups and layoffs. And next thing I know, I'm at Entertainment Tonight thinking, yeah, I'll just take this for a couple months until they lay me off too. And I ended up being there for 13 years.
Wow. Now,
writing about entertainment and I cut my teeth on interviews, and that's really just kind of a piece of the puzzle that connects to Famous Monsters and now these documentaries, because I learned that was something that really brought me a lot of joy, was just chit-chatting with people in the industry, creative people, artists, people who just love to talk about themselves, and I can pick their brains about the industry with some knowledge of my own, and just it all is sort of the synthesis.
That sounds very familiar with what we're doing here. I want to know, you broke the news about Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, and how did that happen?
That was one of those serendipitous things, because I met Mark Hamill at Comic-Con when I wrote a piece about a movie that he did. This is prior to him coming back to the Star Wars franchise, and he had this indie movie called Sushi Girl, where he played this sort of supporting, almost Joker-like character, this wonderful role. You should check out this movie. And it's about a bunch of thieves and con men who, after a heist gone wrong, and half of them went to jail, they all get back to sort of figure out who was the rat, and they're all sitting around this naked sushi girl, at this restaurant, trying to figure it out. And that's sort of the little conceit. And he was promoting that, and I interviewed him about that. And that was when it was going theatrical. And then because I helped promote that for Entertainment Tonight, they came back to me and they said, it's now coming on Blu-ray. Do you want to talk to Mark Hamill? And my first thought was, well, nah, I already talked to him already about this. I don't know if ET wants it a second time. But Disney had just bought Lucasfilm, and they had just announced that they were going to be doing a bunch of Star Wars movies and a whole new trilogy. And I thought, well, he won't tell me a thing, but at the very least, I could ask what his opinion is of it. And we talked about Sushi Girl for 20 minutes, and I'm like, all right, so Star Wars, they're making a bunch of new Star Wars things. Will we ever see Luke Skywalker return to the franchise? And he's like, oh yeah, we're definitely coming back. All of them.
Wow.
I've almost signed on the dotted line. There's just a couple things back and forth, but oh yeah, we're in it definitely. And I was like, okay, sounds,
wow,
that's amazing. And then he talked for another 15 minutes about, yeah, this is what I'd like to see. I wanted to go more retro and practical effects. Oh yeah, they're going to do all these spin-off movies and anthologies. Yeah, I'd like to see one about Salacious Crumb, get all the, the tertiary characters that nobody cares about and make movies about those. And he was just an absolute lark. But I remember I got off of that interview thinking to myself, does anyone know this? And I did a little, Google search, and I'm like, this is nowhere. I just wrote my story and I pressed send. And next thing I know, I'm breaking worldwide a year before Disney announced it officially that the original trilogy cast were coming back. And next thing I know, I find myself sitting down across from Harrison Ford at the junket for 42, the movie with Chadwick Boseman about Jackie Robinson. And so I'm sitting there with Harrison Ford, notoriously taciturn, and asking him about, are we going to see Han Solo, in the new, Star Wars movie? And he goes like this. He does this literally, he zips his lip and he goes, and I'm like, well, Mark Hamill told me that. He's like,
oh man.
and that actually got picked up by The Onion, which was kind of funny. So,
well,
these are my weird claim to fame.
That is just incredible. And based on his comments at the time, do you think Hamill ended up regretting that?
I don't think Mark Hamill has any regrets whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't either. I get that sense about him. I really do, but it was worth asking.
I have to add a little addendum in that Mark Hamill has been very wonderful to me because he was a huge fan of Famous Monsters growing up. Oh, wow. And when Force Awakens was coming out, I said, I would talk to the Disney, publicity, and I said, please, can I talk to somebody? And they're like, oh, we don't know Famous Monsters. We don't know who you are. I'm like, we've been around, like we inspired J.J. Abrams and he's directing the movie, that kind of thing. But they're like, yeah, well, no. And I'm like, well, can you get like the third stormtrooper to the left in that first scene? Just someone from the movie. But by hook and by crook, I made my way to Mark Hamill through some back channels. And it was very, very, very satisfying to ultimately have the publicist who said, no, sorry, calling me saying, are you available to talk to Mark Hamill? And then having to be on the call and listen to Mark Hamill just praise Famous Monsters for 45 minutes about how great. And I was just like, that was satisfying. Yes.
That's fantastic.
And he wanted to pay it
back. Well, I have to bring up, speaking of your willingness to do pretty much anything on a movie set, this particular movie you worked on
within reason, Ike. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I get that. But even stating that that you were a towel wrangler on Castaway is rather fascinating. But I also have to add that's a movie both you and I both worked on, because I actually did the ADR for Castaway, working with Bob Zemeckis.
Oh,
And
really?
so there you are on set wrangling towels. Now, I have some idea what that might entail. Perhaps you can share with our audience who don't know quite so much what that might mean
Well,
as a job.
for anyone in Hollywood, anyone who has a specialty managing a certain section of whatever it may be, you get the title of wrangler. It just sounds better than than towel boy, I suppose. But listen, if I'm working with Bob Zemeckis and Tom Hanks and Ike Eisenmann, I'm happy to call towel boy. But it's basically a friend of mine who I used to work in production was working, on Bob Zemeckis movies. And she calls me one day out of the blue after I had stopped doing production and I was doing development and other things. And she's like, hey, do you want to hang out with Bob Zemeckis and Tom Hanks for a week? We're doing a movie. We've got a problem. We're shooting on the Sony lot at their water tank, doing all this water work. So if you've seen Castaway, he's on the plane crashes. There's, he's under the water, he's on the life, life raft. All that stuff was done in a water tank. And water is just getting everywhere. And so everything is wet. Everyone needs a towel. Everyone's using that towel and just dropping it or leaving it in corners. And there's a bunch of wet towels everywhere. All we need for you, David, is to collect these towels and hand them out, a little more judiciously. And then at the end of the day, take them to the cleaner and we'll pay you way too much money and give you the best tasting food you've ever had on a set. Yeah. And a job that was supposed to be like a 5-day job ended up like practically a month. It was like 3.5 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And, here I am hanging out literally with Tom Hanks and all these people, he's very fun because, I didn't bug him, but we would play this game on to kill time on the set. That was a trivia game. I can't remember, there's some title to it, but basically it's just your film knowledge that you could be as simple or detailed as you like to be, but you have to connect from one film to another just by the name of a person. So, Jonathan, you would say, which mountain? And I would say Ike Eisenmann. And then the next thing would be whatever it would be, whatever project you were, you have to connect it somehow, Kim Richards, or you could say, anyway, you get the point. We got to the point where we were just like, we wanted to get to Grand Theft Auto. We couldn't figure out the name of the first Ron Howard movie that he directed. It's a race car movie. Was it, Eat My Dust? I don't know. What was it, And there's Tom Hanks walking right by who does like every other movie with Ron Howard. So I'm like, Tom, can you have a minute? And he stops and I'm like, trivia question for you. And he's like, and he stops and he gets like arms akimbo, puts his hand to his head, and he says, go ahead. And we're just like, I'm sure you know this. What's the name of Ron Howard's first movie? And then, and he delivered it. He's like, that's it? That's all you need? Okay. And he just walked away. But that was kind of cool having Tom Hanks as our backup when we didn't have Google to look it up.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
I want to talk briefly about Famous Monsters. I love Famous Monsters. And also you did the Heat Vision blog, which focuses on comic books and sci-fi. Sounds like a dream job for me. What were those experiences like?
Well, I'll talk about Heat Vision first. That's for the Hollywood Reporter. So the Hollywood Reporter, once you become an online journalist and an entertainment journalist, and you're in the industry, it's just like the dream to write for Variety or Hollywood Reporter. And I got to write a little bit for Variety, and then a friend of mine was working at the Hollywood Reporter. The longer you stick around, the more you get friends in high places, and then connect you really well. And she connected me with Heat Vision, which to me is my favorite part of the Hollywood Reporter because it's all the geek news. And Aaron Couch, who is the senior editor at Heat Vision at Hollywood Reporter, was, because I had worked at Famous Monsters, was like, I didn't even have to like write a sample. He's like, you want to write for me? Are you kidding me? Absolutely, we would love to have you, And oh, sorry, hang on 2 seconds. I have one of those, Adobe Flash Player when it jumps up and blocks everything.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm back. Take two. But Aaron Couch was wonderful, and what he said, we want to do a bunch of nostalgia pieces. And so I would, on the anniversary of a movie, I would interview the makers of the movie, and just like I'm doing with these movies now. So the first thing I wrote was like Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings in 1978 had its 40th anniversary. So I chatted with Ralph Bakshi on the phone for like 2 hours.
Wow.
It was a joy. But then I'm talking to Philip Kaufman for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I'm talking to Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, and Stephen Herrick for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Child's Play. I talked to Ridley Scott on the anniversary of Alien. I mean, it was just it was like the ultimate job. It was really great. So that was super, super, super cool. And Famous Monsters. Listen, you can already tell that I'm not incapable of telling you a short story. So
that's all right.
but I loved Famous Monsters growing up as a kid. That was the first magazine that showed me that how movies are made. Before I love the monsters. I love Godzilla. I love Frankenstein. I love Creature of the Black Lagoon, Dracula, all those the fun stuff. But that was the first one where I learned about Lon Chaney and movie makeup and all that kind of stuff. And even just movies that I didn't even know, but it was like my curation list. Oh, now I know about this movie and I got to see it just based on that one picture of the monster carrying the lifeless maiden, from one point to another. Very long story short, and I got to meet, Forrest Ackerman was the guy who created this magazine in 1958. When I moved to California, I learned that he still opens up his house to anyone who wants to visit to share his collection of stuff. And I couldn't believe it, because Forrest Ackerman was like the ultimate fan himself. And when he was running Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, he literally put his phone number in the magazine and said, call me. And we could talk about monsters. And no one has ever done that before or since. But he literally put his own phone number in there. And then he would open his house up to people to visit. And I got to do that. And that to me was the ultimate bucket list of my childhood as an adult, being able to do that. Cut to many years later, I'm in line when I work at Entertainment Tonight. I'm just coming from a junket, rubbing elbows with J.J. Abrams and the cast of Star Trek Into Darkness. And I'm going to a screening for The Hobbit, and the guy in front of me has a Famous Monsters sweatshirt. And I said, that is a great sweatshirt. And he's like, oh, thanks. And it could have ended there. But I said, that was like my favorite, magazine as a kid growing up. It's, there's so much nostalgia connected to it. And he said, oh, well, I'm the editor of the magazine. What do you do? And I said, oh, I work for Entertainment Tonight. I just came from a Star Trek junket. He's like, Star Trek? I'd love for someone to write a bridge from the old shows to the new J.J. Abrams movies. How would you like to write it? The next thing I know, I'm like, twist my arm. You want me to write for like the magazine I loved as a kid? And I, as an online journalist, I had not done any print except for like one variety thing. And so now all of a sudden I get to write for print, which is like another little feather in my cap. And cut to, I leave. I end up writing a lot of stuff for them. They loved what I did. They were wonderful. They're a small little company. And when I left Entertainment Tonight, or Entertainment Tonight said goodbye to me after 13 years, as they are wont to do with the people who stay longer and, I guess have a higher salary, they say, see you later. Famous Monsters welcomed me with open arms, and they brought me on as managing editor for the first issue that I did. But the editor, who's Ed Blair, who's this wonderful, wonderful guy who brought me on, he was transitioning out. And next thing I know, I'm running the magazine within one issue. And I had a 7-issue run until they decided they didn't want to do print anymore because print was dying at the time. So,
yeah. Gosh,
that's another one of my short stories.
That's okay. Well, I can probably get a short story out of you now. Your favorite comic book character?
My favorite comic book character, the one that you said when you said that, for some reason, and maybe it's not my favorite, but Morpheus popped in my brain.
Ooh, okay.
you know, because that movie's coming out soon, and I'm not sure if I don't know if I even want to watch it because I love that comic book so much. You know, but I was always I to give a legit answer to that, other than Morpheus, I was definitely a Marvel and DC kid growing up, but I also, you know, I had read all the Star Wars Marvel adaptations. I loved where it went. After Star Wars and before Empire Strikes Back, the world of creative imagination was the oyster of Marvel Star Wars, where you and next thing you know, you have like, you know, mercenaries that are green rabbits, you know, and all sorts of crazy things. So, but I was a huge Fantastic Four fan. I would say probably Fantastic Four, you know, after Batman and Superman. And
I'm hoping that there'll be a good adaptation of that now that Marvel has it again.
Still waiting. You know, the farther we get from the Roger Corman version that nobody saw, the more I think that was probably the best one. At least the design of the thing. Like, why can't you have that? Yeah. Why can't you just give me the big expressive brow? Why do you keep on not doing that? Why? This is important to me.
I do have to ask you, you said you did many interviews. I have to ask you about one in particular, which fascinates you did with Mel Brooks. How was that?
Mel Brooks was amazing. I've spoken to him twice. When I was at Entertainment Tonight, he had a box set from Shout Factory that was coming out, and I got to speak with him for that. And then when I was at Famous Monsters, I got to speak with him on the anniversary of Young Frankenstein. Both times I had maybe 15 minutes of time with him, and he gave me 45 minutes. And he was an absolute mensch. He would talk about anything and everything. When I first spoke with him, the first 5 minutes of the interview, he was interviewing me. He wanted to know who he was talking to. He wanted to know, where'd you grow up? So Entertainment Tonight, they did the online thing, the print, the what, the I love Entertainment Tonight. What'd you do? Well, but why are you doing Entertainment Tonight? No, how'd you get in there? And I got to tell him, like, because I wasn't even going to say it, I'm like, yeah, I remember seeing like Silent Movie in the movie theater and Young Frankenstein. And these are like these movies that shaped me. And, you know, to speak with a legend who at the time was in his late 80s, had the energy of a guy in his 60s in terms of his interview. I mean, it's just amazing to me. And he's just a force of nature and an incredibly generous guy. And I won a Rondo Award for Best Interview of the Year for my interview with Famous Monsters for speaking with him, you know, about Young Frankenstein. And that was super cool. And the one thing that I thought was the most interesting out of that interview that he told me was that the whole putting on the Ritz number, which I think is the funniest thing in the whole film, that was Gene Wilder's idea. And he thought it was a terrible idea. And Gene Wilder fought to have that done. And he said, listen, I know you hate it. Let's just do it. If it really is terrible, then, you know, then I was wrong. But let's try it. And of all people, Mel Brooks thought it was over the top and too much. And then when he saw it, he's like, when you're right, you're right. This is the best thing in the movie.
Yeah. Oh, I remember seeing it in the theater, and I was too young to quite appreciate that joke. But my gosh, the theater just erupted with laughter when that happened. They went crazy. It was probably the big, I mean, it was obviously full of laughs. That was probably the biggest laugh that the film got in the screening that I saw. Good gosh. Well, circling back to your, I call them epic documentaries. We did kind of cover how they got started, but back in the very beginning, was the plan always to produce them in such a long format? I mean, 4+ hours of content, or did it evolve that way?
It evolved pretty quickly that way. As a crowdfunded project, the idea was to do just the concept, you know, tackle. Robin Bloch always wanted to say, let's take the whole decade and go movie by movie. And we crowdfunded for that, you know, that purpose. But it was always the intention of doing a 2-hour movie. You know, if we reached our stretch goals, we might hit a 3-hour cut or something like that. But when I really sort of dug into the outlining and putting it together, I just thought the structure demands you really gotta, first of all, you can't go movie by movie. It's gonna feel repetitive after a certain point. You have to structure it a little differently. You need these sort of in-between topics and chapters for a broader context of the whole decade, rather than just movie by movie. And next thing I know, that in order to accommodate that, we're sailing past 4 hours and it's still not enough. And I just said to Robin, as I was putting this thing together, I'm just like, how long can we go with this? Because I've got a 5-hour cut for you. What do you think? You know, and we trimmed it down to 4.5 hours based on the capacity of the DVD and the Blu-ray and how much data and, you know, information it could hold, storage.
Yeah.
And that's and it really, the film In Search of Darkness set itself apart from so many other documentaries, because this is really like, you got to be really devoted to sit and watch this, you know. And it's never meant to be a theatrical release. It was always meant to be home video, DVD or Blu-ray. So it's designed where you could stop it at any point essentially and get up and come back, and you still can get the same experience. But we were finding more and more people who said, all right, I'll watch about an hour. We're like, all right, I'll watch another hour. Okay, 3 hours in. All right, and then they finish it, and despite themselves, and they couldn't believe that they made it through. And then they're like, that's it? That's all? Isn't there more? And then you start realizing that there's so much to cover in a decade. You cannot be definitive, even if you call yourself that. There's just more. And so you have to go part 2, part 3, however many people want and ask for. And people were asking for more. And so what started out as just sort of, you know, the mother of necessity was then something intentional. And then something people were supporting us and asking for more of. And so when In Search of Tomorrow came along, well, I'm just like, you know, I'll stick to 4.5 hours, but I found that the content for sci-fi versus horror, there's a little more of a intellectual explanation required with a lot of these films to just sort of get into it. When you're talking about the making of and the themes, there's also just explaining what it's about if you don't know the film that well. It takes a little extra time. And so all of these just needed a little more time. And next thing we know, we're, you know, with credits, a 5-hour film.
Yeah.
Well, I absolutely loved In Search of Darkness. I am a big horror person. I told Ike that we have to have you back to talk about all the horror related stuff there too. I mean, those 80s horror movies like influenced my own writing a lot, you know, the things that I've done. But you know, what made the decision to do it like, you know, a crowdfunding type thing as opposed to like the traditional methods? That's what I'm curious.
First of all, no one's going to fund, even though we didn't know it at the time, no one's going to fund, they're going to want to either make it a series. You know, that's the one question we get the most often. And I understand that completely. Well, why isn't this a series? Why is it a 5-hour movie? And there are a couple reasons behind that. One, it was crowdfunded. And so we only have the budget to make a single film, even if it's a long film. To make it a series just takes more time, takes more money, takes more resources. It just takes longer to make these. And it's not, you know, the blood, sweat, and tears and the return on the investment in terms of how much you crowdfund versus what you deliver. If you're doing it yourself, that really is the best way of doing it, especially because it really kind of puts a spotlight on us as being a little bit different. But the key thing out of all the reasons why you would or wouldn't do a series versus, you know, something else, first of all, it's control, creative control. When you're pitching to studios and streamers and distributors, more people are in the mix, more cooks are in the kitchen, less and less control, and it's really not worth it. And what sets Creator VC apart, which is another reason why I'm really proud to be part of this company that does things differently, is that it's all community driven content. So we focus on like 1,000 true fans. And the idea that the biggest horror fans or the biggest sci-fi fans really want these deep dives, and they're willing to be part of creating this and responsible for getting it made, whether you're kickstarting, whether you're Indiegogo or a final sale. We do everything from everyone's names go in the credits. to inviting them to be part of the process throughout. And so when we're definitely in the development stage of these, we get everyone's opinion. What do you want to see? Who would you like to see? What would you like this to be about? Throughout the process, as we're making it, we talk with the backers to say, what questions do you have? How can we drive this in a certain way that would be most appealing to you? And we've created a Discord community as well, where every week we're doing watch parties of all their favorite movies, horror and sci-fi every other week. And we've brought a whole community together of like-minded geeks and movie fans, just talking about everything from their collectibles to their happy childhood memories to talking about whatever movie it might be, and either bringing on a guest or just having ourselves host it. People love the community-driven element of all of this stuff, and it's coincided, ironically, with COVID, where we all had to kind of be at home for the longest time, where people really needed some social connection and a thing to look forward to. And we were doing that with these weekly watch parties, and this connective element that no documentary seems to really do. So
no, this was
by the time the movie, by the time the movie comes out, it's not like you funded it and then you get it at the end. You're part of this whole process with a group of people who aren't just doing it because we can make movies and this is popular, so let's do it. They know that we're all fans,
Oh, there's my dog, of course.
Oh, yeah, we have a guest on the podcast.
We do.
You had all these incredible names.
Because they know that we're all
Yes.
fans as well as you guys,
Well, he's a big fan. How did you get all these people to appear? I mean, you had like Billy D. Williams, John Carpenter. I mean, besides Ike, also Ivan Reitman, who just recently passed. I mean, how do you get everyone to jump aboard on this?
It's a major endeavor for the outreach. We decide, so for those people who aren't that familiar with the structure. So in addition to, like, the reason why it's 4 or 5 hours is you go, year by year, and then you have the chapters in between. And the idea is to get anywhere between 50, 70 plus people who are in front of the camera or behind the camera or experts on the genre. But I really want to get a combination of actors, composers, directors, writers, makeup effects artists, sound mixers, sound designers, and so on and so forth. People who are just, were part of these movies and these iconic movies, who have the stories to tell about them. But also the idea is to get people who are really knowledgeable to sort of fill in the gaps that these other people can't. And collectively, it's this one amazing story where not only do you see Ivan Reitman talking about Ghostbusters, for example, but he produced Heavy Metal, the animated movie, or he executive produced Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone in 3D. We don't see him talking about that much. He's always on Ghostbusters mode. So whether it's Ivan Reitman talking about that kind of stuff, or whether it's Craig Safin, who composed The Last Starfighter, and between him and Joe Dante, they could be talking about not only composing for music, but like the temp track, that people edit to, and then it's all a backwards process because you edit to a temp track that's going to change, and that makes it a complicated process when you're editing a film to music that you're going to switch out on. People become married to their temp track. It's like all this insider baseball that I think is incredibly interesting when it's connected to all the movies that we loved in the 80s. But this movie becomes that much more engaging when you have all these people that you recognize, or we're connected to a project, and they're just talking about how exciting it was for them and how cool it was, or having Ike talking about being in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. Ike being a fan, I'm talking to you like as if you're not here, Ike.
It's okay.
Ike being a fan himself of Star Trek, and he gets to be a fly on the wall as well as being in the movie. And that to me is an incredibly valuable insight that you don't always get. you know, but like next to Ike, I also have, you know, Nicholas Meyer, who directed the movie, which is like mind blowing.
That was fantastic. I mean,
Then,
my God, it was so great to see him in there and listen to, just to hear his stories as well. Yeah.
I mean, he's just great. I mean, I felt like when I interviewed him, I felt like I sat at a TED talk, you know. He was great.
I bet. Yeah.
He's such he's just a great speaker and a storyteller. But, you know, also, I mean, Walter Koenig sitting in my backyard. I shot a lot of this in my backyard because of COVID. And having Walter Koenig there and Adam Nimoy, son of Leonard Nimoy, just to add their perspective to all this is just, you know, as a sci-fi fan, kid in the candy store is all I could say.
Well, I mean, you had so many great commentators in the piece, and I just have to particularly point out Will Wheaton, because I just thought he was particularly outstanding. He's just such a smart guy and so insightful, and had a lot of really interesting things to say just about the genre in general. But were there any personalities that you reached out to that like declined to be a part of it, or couldn't for any particular reason that obviously would have disappointed you greatly?
Yeah, you know, yes, yeah. I mean, we reach for the stars and we get many stars, but we can't get everybody.
Yeah.
And who we ultimately get, I'm very proud of who we have. And there's some very unexpected names, but there's always people there are even people who said yes, and then because this was a film shot in the time of COVID, you know, once we got a bunch of people, then no one could do anything, including us. And then when people could start sort of poking their heads out like, you know, meerkats, ultimately they either didn't want to come out still based on health concerns, or all of a sudden they were just super busy because they hadn't been doing anything for months, and then they were in demand. And so there was a weird, you know, it was herding cats trying to get everyone who had said yes, and we couldn't get everyone who said yes, but we also added names to compensate for the people who couldn't make it. But on the flip side, you know, we're always aspiring to get as many people as possible, but it comes down to capacity. You know, once you're passing 70 faces in a movie, it's diminishing returns. You know, I know, you know, you're probably like, you know, I hope you weren't having like Star Trek II flashback saying, but what about that whole thing where I talked about the hidden? It's not in there, you know?
Oh, no, I didn't expect all that to be.
We'll save it for part 2, ideally, because I cut that piece and then it didn't make the cut because I didn't have time, you know?
Yeah.
So there's just, the more people that are in it, the less time everybody gets as well. And so there's, you know, a bit of an alchemy to the whole project. But
you also had such a wide variety of films, and I love sci-fi, and I didn't know every movie that you put on there. Did you know everything ahead of time, or just like some you remember just doing research? Oh yeah, I forgot about that film.
I was a movie nut through and through, but they're definitely, so I went to movies all the time. But have I seen every movie ever made? Of course not, you know. And that being said, what I do is I start the whole process with what came out year by year, and I get excited. I'm like, oh, that's great. You know, I forgot that was, you know, Saturn III was 1980 and not 1978 or something like that. You know, I love Saturn III for a variety of strange reasons, you know, because it's the movie that I keep returning to, hoping that it would get better, but it doesn't. But I still am obsessed with it, you know. But yeah, you look at all these titles and you think to yourself, oh, excellent, you know. The trick was, what is the breadth of science fiction? What do I want to define this as? You know, is it outer space and is it aliens? Is it is it future and time travel? Do we get to do Mad Max and the apocalyptic genre? Do we get to do the what if genre? You know, does, you know, War Games or Miracle Mile? You know, do these things fit and qualify? And once I determine that I can get all that stuff in, and really sort of in broad terms talk about all these things and how they affected, how the world in the 80s affected the movies and the entertainment and the escapism that we went to and paid money for. It was it was very cool to be able to put this sort of jigsaw puzzle together.
Hmm. Well, I mean, with all the amazing stories that people told from these different films, what was like probably the most surprising to you that you knew nothing about? Let's say about a particular film.
I have to think about that one. I did not know that Deep Roy, who a lot of people know Deep Roy from the Tim Burton movies. Like he was the Oompa Loompas in the Willy Wonka remake, and he's been around for the longest time, and he was in Flash Gordon. He was one of the Ewoks. Actually, he was 7. I didn't know this.
Yeah, that was interesting.
He was 7 different Ewoks, but I did not know that he was also in The Empire Strikes Back as Yoda in one of the long shot scenes where Yoda's walking to his house. I always thought it was, everyone said it's Frank Oz and a puppet, so I figure it's a puppet through and through. I did not know that he got into the Yoda suit. There's lots of little details here. I don't want to spoil too many things, but it's just like I don't claim to ever know it all, but I'm one of those kids, like many of us, who I pored over Starlog magazine and Cinefantastique and Cinefex and Premiere magazine, and I just gleaned as much information as I could about all this stuff. So I know a lot, but I've also forgotten a lot. and so revisiting a lot of these things, I was like, oh yeah, this is a perfect opportunity to add this. Now I have to think, do people know this? Is this common knowledge? Am I the only guy who knew this and I've already forgotten it? And there's a certain balance of putting in information that people already know to reinforce what they think might have happened. There's also just brand new information that they've never heard before. And then there's just the connective, this is what it's about and this is why it was fun to do. And we all know this, but I'm now the guy who was in it, like Billy D. Williams, telling you how cool it was. But I'll just throw in one more element, which I thought was cool, was Billy D. Williams and his observations of working with George Lucas. He loved working on Empire. He loved working on Return of the Jedi. He was so happy to be invited to be part of the Star Wars franchise. And he's very much into, uniqueness and the power of the imagination and storytelling. And he's like staring at George Lucas, who's furrowing his brow over the budget, because he's doing it all on his own shoulders for Empire Strikes Back. It's not a studio film; it's a studio distributed film, but he's paying the bills. And so he was just every moment of every day looking, how do I cut, keep the budget down? How do I cut corners? How do I keep this contained? Whereas this is like the movie that transformed so many of us. He was just like, oh man, I'm going over budget with the Met department and I got to double up. And Ralph McQuarrie, who was doing, the concept drawings, we got to put him on matte painting duty, so we can get all the matte paintings done, before the release date. So it's interesting stuff.
Well, it was a tough breaking down the movies, because I was so happy that you had Final Countdown in there. I love that movie. And so there was that. And also, I could spend like much more time with that. And heavy metal. I love sci-fi, and a lot of my friends who like sci-fi don't even remember heavy metal talking about it. So was it tough picking out like which ones to go in and not?
It was tough because there's not enough time. And that's the running joke, I guess, maybe with myself, that I made a 5-hour movie and there's nowhere near enough time. Right. So, and I had the experience of doing In Search of Darkness Part 1 and Part 2, where people would say, I loved it, but where's this movie? Why didn't you include this? This was so obvious. How could you forget this? Why didn't you get this person? And there a lot of it, especially not talent, separate from that, just the content of the material. You ultimately just can't fit all of it, and so you have to really make some tough decisions about what does this kind of represent for this particular year. I want to get popular, but I want to get eclectic stuff. The biggest trap is I can't fit all the popular ones without putting in the eclectic ones. And then if I take out popular ones, people are like, well, that's the most obvious one. How could you not put that in there? And there's some iconic movies. And if I verbalize them, you'd be like, oh yeah, that wasn't in there. Why wasn't that in there? And then there's a whole story that I have to explain about that one and why it didn't make the cut. But all I could say is it's an excruciating process for me because I'm a completist and I want everything in there.
One of the things you did talk about there, which was fascinating, and I talk to my kids about this all the time, was the hyping of movies. It wasn't like now that, there's all this buzz on the internet for, to get you excited about for a movie. It was like talk shows, commercials, word of mouth, and, like music videos you had in there as well too. Like Back to the Future, which it's my favorite movie of all time, but at the time, it was like, all I knew is it had the kid from from Family Ties. Is Spielberg's associated with it? I want to see it. I didn't know too much about it, and it's time travel. So that was one of the things. How did you decide like what chapters to put into your documentary?
Ever since my Famous Monsters days, I've been always intrigued with filmmaking, and to the point that I went to film school. And at certain times I have to think to myself, am I being too much of a film geek? When I'm going sort of on the deep dive of the making of stuff. And so to me, like, you have to have a visual effects chapter. And then I realized that there's so much in the visual effects chapter. You have to talk about the creature effects and the special effects and that kind of stuff separately. The music is so important, but I also like to include chapters that are context of the era, whether it's, a taste of the pop culture or the politics or the sociology at the time, or when we were in the 80s, the Cold War was a tremendous factor in terms of how we lived day by day, wondering if we were going to, the two superpowers of the United States and Russia were just not going to agree one day, and we were all just going to disappear in a poof of smoke.
Thank God that's changed.
It was, yeah. That's the thing also, right. What goes around comes around. And, right. The last thing I want to be is in the zeitgeist again for that kind of reason. Sure. But it is more, these things ultimately don't go away. But that was one of the things when I did return to this era, the more I thought about it, the more I realized and remembered what I had repressed, which was we really were thinking about this in the back of our minds on a daily basis, that nuclear Armageddon was just, a big red button away, and so, to have Nicholas Meyer not only talk about, his Star Trek movies, but also to talk about The Day After, which he directed, which was the most watched TV movie ever back in those days. That reflected what we were up against and how the movies that we were watching embraced a lot of this stuff as sort of an outlet for us, for some sort of catharsis to be able to deal with the pressure or escape from the pressure by having other, on-screen protagonists handling the stuff that we didn't want to handle in real life.
I'm really glad you included that and got a chance to talk to Nick about that, because I remember watching that movie the week. And for me growing up during that era and really the persistent horrible social stress that we all felt, this was always in the back of everyone's mind all the time for a very long time. So it was really rough. And these movies were great escapes. I mean, fantastic escapes. But yes, it really did seem to inform a lot of the stories in many ways. But I know there's probably too many influential sci-fi films from the decade to pick one, but what if you had to grab one and say this is the most influential sci-fi film from that decade, what do you think that one would be?
I think that, of course, it's a matter of opinion, but Blade Runner might be it. In terms of what people seem to reference over and over and over and over and over and over. I like to say that aliens, I'm going to give you 10 answers, and you asked for one.
That's okay. I was,
but like Aliens to me, I think is kind of the movie that if I'm forced to choose one, maybe best represents the era, because it's a hybrid of, action and sci-fi and horror. It's the sequel to and one-upping one of my all-time favorite movies, Alien, which was incredibly influential for so many of the films that came out in the 80s. And so by the time Aliens came out in 86, it could have been worn and tired going back to revisiting the Xenomorph, you know, but somehow James Cameron, who took everything he knew and learned from Corman and then the Terminator and put it in, you know, everything is on screen, all his, you know, he's at the height of his game making this movie. I think it really is a great reflection of what the best could accomplish from the 80s, you know. But then again, you know, how could you overlook Star Wars and the influence of Star Wars and Empire being the first thing out of the gate in the 80s, that everyone wanted to be like Star Wars. So, but yeah, I think Blade Runner, maybe because of its tone, because of its themes, because of the technology, the replicants, the kind of things that are mundane in that world, which is dealing with all sorts of environmental issues, where it's the point where we all want to, we're giving up on Earth, and if you're rich enough, you could go off world, you know. But we also want to, you know, we have, our resources are so limited that we have to fabricate animals, you know, owls and snakes and things like that as pets, because who knows, the environment might not have so much of that anymore. And then companions, you know, short-lived companions having their at the highest price point because it's a business. And what is the question of, you know, who has the humanity, is, you know, and what rights does AI have if they're so much like humans and humanity? I mean, it tackles so many ideas that to this day, even before Blade Runner 2049 came around, I think people were just going back to Ridley Scott's magnum opus of visual splendor and ideas, and that might be it.
All right. Well,
what about you guys? What about you guys?
Well, that is my,
pick one to represent the whole era.
Blade Runner is definitely mine for sure. I mean, it overwhelmed me the first time I saw it, and we've all talked about the narration ad nauseum. But you know, setting that aside, I was so glad you had someone else who commented about that in the documentary, so I wasn't the lone kind of voice out there hanging my rear end.
Yeah, you had John Carpenter saying, "What the hell was that?"
Yeah, I felt in very good company there. But yeah, I mean, just all those themes, and you know, none of them were overt. It was just like you just entered into this very possible world, and I just, from a visual standpoint, which is quite often where my you know, that feeds my senses the most. That's what I love about science fiction more than anything, is everything is created. You know, everything is created, even though it's all real stuff in some way. It has to be, otherwise you can't shoot it. But you just get to see a whole nother imaginative world and universe, and that just did it for me. I was speechless the entire film, just like, oh my gosh. And I don't remember how many times I saw it in the theater when it came out, and that was not a big thing for me to do. You know, Star Wars is one that I saw repeatedly, and so many people did. But anyway, that was my pick for the 80s for sure, just as a favorite, not let alone influential.
And we're still waiting for our flying cars. Like, where's my spinner? You know?
Oh yeah.
It was due in 2019 at the very least.
Yeah, there you go. So.
Can I put in my opinion?
Please do, John.
Yeah.
You're up.
In my opinion, I think E.T., just because, like we said before, the 70s sci-fi was much darker, with the exception of Star Wars for the most part. E.T. was like, all of a sudden, it's sci-fi for the family, and you're introducing it, making it accessible for, you know, kids to be able to like come into this genre and love this genre. So I thought that was, and it was a blockbuster. I mean, just total blockbuster. It showed to me what sci-fi is capable of, as far as for a broad audience, and as far as for a familial audience as well. That's my pick anyway.
Well, it's very cool. We were for Blade Runner to have Sean Young talk to us, for E.T. to have Dee Wallace talk to us and share some of their set stories and observations was really priceless for us for this film. And even I made sure that it was in there, even though it wasn't in the 80s, that Close Encounters, was such a huge pivotal movie for me. And I think E.T. owes a lot to Close Encounters, because that's kind of the sort of the next step evolution of where Spielberg wanted to go, but he really had to cut his teeth on Close Encounters first. And because of the approval and confirmation of that film at the box office, that made him say, all right, I'm encouraged here. I get to make, a boy's life story, a boy and his dog, except he's an alien instead. I'll do this little film, and then next thing you know, it's massive.
Well, we had talked before we started recording. You mentioned we just did a top 5 episode on our 80s sci-fi. So you said to disagree. Do you have a top 5, or you want to plead the 5th? So.
I'm gonna plead the 5th on the top 5. I mean, I could throw a bunch of titles out. When you were asking about, I wasn't sure if when you specified that you wanted to represent, the entire decade, I really had to go kind of to Blade Runner and Aliens. But I always like to give a shout out to Peter Hyams' Outland. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. When I saw that in the theater, I remember one of the rare double features that I went to, they were having a double feature of Excalibur and Outland.
Oh, wow.
And that was like one of the great days of the movies for me, because 2 of my all-time favorite films. And Outland, to me, look, I'm wearing a Con-Am 27 shirt. In Nostromo, maybe I'm crossing the streams here, but
do we have to sell shirts? Because I got it on my Hill Valley.
Yeah, there you go. But the concept of Outland, I've always loved Sean Connery. He could do no wrong, even in Zardoz. And but the thing is, I just love the fact that this was such an efficient and confident thriller that it was a Western that just happened to be in space. And so the production design, I think I connected to it because I was such a huge fan of Alien, that when I saw Outland, I felt like this was like, even though there's no aliens, which is fine, I felt like I was part of that universe. And it's just another story or another chapter in the world that Ridley Scott built. And Peter Hyams definitely, does a tip of his hat to Ridley Scott and to George Lucas in terms of like the lived-in worlds that we were experiencing that were very different from, say, 2001: Space Odyssey, which is very clean and sanitized. This is a little more blue collar. And I just connected to the fact that this was much more a possibility in our semi-near future. And it's just it's such a well-crafted film. So just to get Peter Hyams to sit with me and talk about that, and talk about 2010. He talked a little bit about Capricorn 1, but that was prior to the 80s. He's such a great filmmaker. Time Cop, don't forget. But just to also, I always thought that he was a guy who was way too serious. I never met him, but I got that impression. And then sitting with him, he's so self-effacing and has such a great sense of humor. And it's so warm, and was so happy to just talk about these movies. It was an absolute treat for me.
You mentioned that there's going to be In Search of Darkness 3. Will there be an In Search of Tomorrow 2?
I would love to have an In Search of Tomorrow 2. It's up to the world to respond and say, we really like this movie, and prove, that if it does well enough that they want more, So that's the idea, is, get the word out. That's that for the people who aren't sold yet, the people who love 80s movies, but don't, because the difficulty in selling In Search of Tomorrow is that the fans know, but the people who love 80s movies, but they're like, well, I was never much of a sci-fi person. You're like, yeah, but you love Back to the Future, you love Ghostbusters, you love E.T., you love, Short Circuit. You love weird science. There's so much more here. Maybe Earth Girls Are Easy. There's so much more there that you don't have to be like, a giant nerd brain to just enjoy this whole era of filmmaking, whether, you love John Hughes or you loved, Top Gun or Red Dawn, it all just kind of fits in this puzzle of this era where a lot of these movies reflected other films, Howard the Duck, however you feel about Howard the Duck, that movie is more about Leah Thompson and her girl band and big hair as much as walking, talking duck from outer space.
Well, any other potential topics that you're considering? And I'll throw out there like 80s comedies or sci-fi TV series also.
Yeah. We're a very small company, so these things take time and lots of resources. But the response to these movies has been so wonderfully positive that we're going to keep on doing things like this. And so In Search of Darkness, which focuses on 80s, after In Search of Darkness 1, I thought, great, that'll be that. And then there was a demand for part 2, and I thought, great, that'll be that. And then there was such a demand for part 3. I was like, I guess I'm making 3. I'm happy to do it. I did not expect anyone to even ask. But I think after this, the idea is not, I know. I just don't know what's next, but we want to go to In Search of Darkness 90s. We also want to do In Search of Darkness 70s. We're also developing a project, In Search of Legends, which is 80s fantasy. So Conan the Barbarian or Never-Ending Story or Dark Crystal, any of these movies that were, the fantastic that we know and love from that era, that's going to get its moment in the sun as well. And we're working on some video game stuff as well.
Oh, cool.
We're in early development on In Search of Pixels, about the whole video game revolution, and Creator VC is also making a film called FPS, which is first person shooter, about those type, like the Doom and Halo kind of games and the origins and the setup of that kind of stuff. And
I'm looking forward to that.
Robin Block definitely has a mind to really expand our repertoire, but keep it kind of in the fold with these types of documentaries that we're doing. And I'm very pleased that people want more.
Well, let's get the plug in. Where can people go to purchase In Search of Tomorrow? And I saw that there's still opportunities for sponsorships, right? So that's right.
Yeah. So the way it works is it's not like, oh, where's it going to stream? Where do I get it in the store? That kind of stuff. We're a small company. We manufacture it and distribute it ourselves. And so you go between now and March 27th. Which is our deadline for all of this stuff. You go to 80sscifidoc.com, 80sscifidoc.com, or our socials on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter are at 80sscifidoc.
We'll put all that in the video as well.
Yeah, great. And that's how you get it. And so you get it, and if you get it before March 27th, you get your name in the credits. And if you put anything you want, so if you want to put your podcast name in there instead, you could do that, whatever you'd like to do, But you get to be part of the group that ultimately gets this over the finish line. The film is done, but in terms of this first manufacturing batch, you're the ones who get to be immortalized in the credits. And you get lots of other cool stuff. You get like exclusive posters and this wonderful poster art and, stickers. You get a DVD or the Blu-ray and a slipcover, a digital copy of the movie, lots of swag and cool stuff. And, spread the word and tell your friends and, hope you enjoy it.
Absolutely will.
Yeah.
It was such a great, we were talking about it, such a great documentary. I loved it. Like I said, I watched it twice, 5 hours it seemed to go by each time.
I'm so glad that you guys, I wanted you guys to see it because I could just talk about it, but I'm very interested in how you guys responded to it, and Ike, I'd love to hear how you thought about being alongside all these other wonderful talent, including yourself, and how you felt being integrated into the story. And
I felt beyond honored. I was just like, oh my gosh. I can't believe all these people that I'm getting to spend time with on screen. It was fantastic, and hear their stories and just being a part of it was so much fun. Honestly, you're one of the best interviewers I have ever worked with. And I have to say that in front of Jonathan, who's a very good interviewer also. But I found talking to you to be so much more fun. and you got so much out of me, and I just had such a great time. And so experiencing it was a blast. And I found myself, and this happens to me even sometimes when we do this show, I've kept forgetting that I was in it, and I'm watching it and I'm so engaged, and all of a sudden I pop up and say something. I went, oh my God, okay, wow, oh yeah, that's right. But I had exactly the same experience Jonathan did, and the one you just described, where I sat down, I thought, okay, I'll knock out half an hour today or an hour, and then I'll just every morning I'll watch. And I watched 3 hours of it the first time I sat down, and the next day I thought, well, oh my gosh, I only have like an hour and a half left. And then I was really counting down, and I thought, wait a minute, this is like got a running time of 5 hours. There must be an awful lot of credits because we're almost at a show. And I was so disappointed. So I look forward to revisiting it again. And it's just, I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So we're so grateful to have you on to talk about it. I can't wait for people to get a chance to see it. And your whole series is just phenomenal. It's just such a great, great idea, great concept. And for all of us who can't consume enough of this, the behind the scenes stories, which I've always been a fan of. I mean, going back to, you tell people about commentary tracks on DVDs and they say, what? No. I mean, that was, I bought DVDs almost solely to listen to the commentary tracks and listen to people talk about working on the films. Cause I just, I have my own commentary track on, my own DVD, which I'm excited about. From Witch Mountain, the first DVD release of Witch Mountain, they had Kim and I do, a running commentary, and I had so much fun talking about it, and I was so excited to be able to share those stories with the people who are into it. So that's what, to me, so yes, it's my long answer to your question. I was absolutely honored, and I enjoyed the heck out of it, and was so pleased to be able to represent something as monumental and important in 80s sci-fi as Star Trek 2. I mean, I still am giddy to this day. It's the smallest part I've ever had in one of my favorite movies I've ever done. And I say that frequently, but it's true. So thank you so much for inviting me.
It was absolute pleasure to have you in this film. And we premiered the film in Hollywood, and I know you're across the country, but I wanted to at least extend,
Oh no, I'm so sad I couldn't be there, because that would have been so much fun.
But I wanted to mention to you that that was the first time that I got to sit with an audience, and have them watch a 5-hour film, which we divided in half. We did 2.5 hours, then we had an hour intermission and a Q&A, and then the rest of the film. But that's the time when I get to hear the oohs and the ahs and the laughs, or the crickets when I expected something. I have to say, perhaps your impression of George Takei might have gotten the loudest laugh. And even having seen the movie 5,000 times, because I had to watch it over and over for everything from the sound mix to the color balance to, I always get a smile on my face when I'm like, oh, we're getting to that point where Ike's going to do his Takei impression.
Oh God! Well, thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that, because that's one of my favorite stories. I swear, he's what a great man and great personality, and it was. And so I'm not going to hint at it. I'll leave it for everybody to
see the documentary if you want to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone must. You got to order your Blu-rays and get your name at the end of this film along with mine.
But and Jonathan, I really appreciate you. The both, you guys are champions being able to sit, for, I know, I recognize that it's a long sit, you get your popcorn, you don't have your beer, you have to have your coffee, your double shot espresso, to sit through it. And, you have to wear your adult diaper as well if you don't want to miss anything.
I was absolutely being sincere. I was getting upset when I was nearing the end. I was like, oh, I want more. This, like I said, it brought back so much nostalgia to me. This was my decade, my era, and everyone. I remember sitting in the theater watching these movies to begin with the first time around. So it's just like, I definitely wanted more at the end. So I do hope there is a part 2.
There, a lot of this really is, maybe I'll just close with this in terms of the movie itself. I think what resonates with a lot of people, and I found this with the other In Search of Darkness films as well, I think it very much translates to this as well, is that, you know, intellectually, we're like, we want to find out more about the movies and talk to the people who were part of it and that kind of stuff like that. But collectively, whether you saw this movie or not, this is a time in our lives that was incredibly pivotal and important. And a lot of these movies, whether it's E.T. or Mac and Me, the thing is, it's more than just the movie itself. It's the time in your life. It's what you were experiencing at the time, who you were watching these movies with, what you might have been escaping from, or just, you know, it's the summer that was the happiest summer of your life. And there's a whole nostalgic element that goes beyond the movies themselves. And so we get to really experience that through this film just by way of touch points, saying, oh yeah, that, oh yeah, that, oh yeah, that was going on. Oh, and they're talking about the movies too. And to see so many other people excited about it and talking about it and enthusiastic about it and reveling over just a celebration of a era that's simply movie making, you know, filmmaking. These things are real important to us. And when you can bring it all together, even if it's a 5-hour piece, people sort of really kind of are transported back to a certain time that is incredibly important to them.
I remember sneaking and watching heavy metal because with my parents were not around. So that's what stuck out.
Right? Half of these were like, you know, I snuck into this movie and my mind was blown, you know?
Exactly. Well, David, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure, and your documentary is great. Again, it's In Search of Tomorrow, the definitive 80s sci-fi documentary, and it really is. I definitely recommend everyone go out and watch it. Go purchase it now ahead of time. We'll put all the information in, and you will not be disappointed.
Yeah, 80s SciFi.com, and it's much appreciated. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time to sit and talk with me. I really enjoy your podcast, and you know, your podcast takes me back too, as well. So, you know, we all traffic in nostalgia, and I think that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'll mention our names on the way out. And again, this is Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and a very special thank you to David Weiner for joining us today. And please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.